So let me introduce my guests. I'm Ronelle Delmont, and the lady who has written this incredible book, Suspect #1, The Man Who Got Away, is Lise Pearlman, who is pictured beneath me on the screen. Hi, Lisa, wave your hand.
Hi.
And her daughter is Jamie Benvenutti, who lives
Yes, you got it right.
What?
Good job on the pronunciation. Good job on the pronunciation.
Well, I studied Italian because I'm an opera nut. Since I was 12 years old, so I love Italian. I used to speak it a little bit. So Jamie Benvenutti is in Kansas, Lawrence, Kansas, and we've got Lise Pearlman in, Los Angeles?
California. I'm in Oakland, California.
Oakland. I didn't want to say, I did remember.
Let me fix the light here.
Yeah, there's a lot of light behind you.
Yeah.
There we go.
Mom, go ahead and grab all of them. All of them.
Right.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
And I'm situated in Hollywood, Florida. So we've got Florida, Kansas, the Midwest, and we've got two coasts here.
There we go.
It's amazing that we're going to be, the sound sounds pretty good right now. Well, since I am the interviewer, I have been blown away by your book. I told you, I think it's going to send all the previous books on the Lindbergh case back to the Stone Age, because there are things in here. And we'll get to the photograph of the boy on the bike if you want to give your version of what people have criticized you for. There's so much in this book that I love. The first thing I have to say is Carrel. Alexis Carrel had to have been part of this story. I have searched for so long to put him into the story. He has to have been tied up. It was during the time Lindbergh was working with Carrel at the Rockefeller Institute, in which this happened, and there isn't a smidgen anywhere, not a statement, not in the press, nowhere, that Alexis Carrel ever made regarding the case. And that was always suspicious. And you've got chapters in here about Carrel. Jamie, you were a researcher for your mom. So you know from beginning to end everything in this
everything
book.
That's in there, yeah.
And I don't know where you found the time to do this. Look at the size of it. It's 600 pages with 300 pages in footnotes and explanations of where you got everything. I can pick up this book many times, and I wonder how you wrote it. You had more help than Jamie, right? You had your sister.
I did. I had other researchers, but Jamie was the primary researcher. She is amazing. And we're in the age of the internet where many rare collections are accessible that didn't used to be accessible. But she doesn't quit. She's like a pit bull when it comes to looking for things. But we had researchers, college students I had working for me in Washington, D.C., going to Georgetown archives, going to the Library of Congress. I had help at Smith College. I went back east, and my sister actually helped, and Jamie helped. We went to Yale before they closed it because of COVID. But now you can't get access to their archives, but you could then. A lot of work I did in New Jersey. I went to state archives, and Jamie and I went down to Philadelphia and found some very interesting information at the Philosophers Club archives in Philadelphia, which Carrel belonged to. He corresponded with a lot of doctors and others who were part of that organization. And it's amazing what you can find if you keep looking.
One of the things I want to say about the internet age is that there are a lot of archives that have not been digitalized yet. And I think that's where maybe a lot of researchers kind of stop if they can't get there physically because they haven't digitalized their collections yet. So what we did is my mom had connections where she could get local researchers, and all we would ask them to do is take pictures. take pictures on your camera, on your phone of the documents that are there, because they're allowed to take pictures, and then upload them to like an online folder that we can access. And that way it's kind of like our personal collection, but anybody can do that. You don't have to be, just because it's like 1,000 miles away doesn't mean you can't get access to it. You just have to find another way to do it. And
there are a lot of local researchers.
Well, there's that. Yeah. Yep.
Don't they charge by the
sorry.
hour a lot of money to do this for you? No?
Not if you pay. Well, you can talk about how you did that, Mom.
Well, college students are not very expensive in terms of the kind of money they can command for their research. I mean, one fellow, I think he only worked about 10 hours, but he got some key stuff. And that's a lot cheaper than me taking a flight there and doing the research myself. I went to UCLA, I went to Stanford. Once we zeroed in on the collections, went to the Rockefeller Institute multiple days in Sleepy Hollow, New York. You have to make an appointment. You have to tell them exactly what you want. But it's online, what's in their collection.
Yeah, the finding aid is online, but the actual documents are not digitalized, right?
No, they're not. You have to go there for some of them. And I made the effort to go. And Jamie went to some of them. And I went to a lot.
Yeah, but then when you take your picture.
Yeah, go ahead, Jamie. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but then when you take your picture, it's wonderful now that they allow you to take pictures. And now, because everything can be uploaded online, once you take your picture, you don't have to go back there again. You just click, and you got your own archive. So, yeah, so that makes it so much easier.
I've done that myself over the years at the Library of Congress because they allowed me. This is 15 years. I've been there many times. I've got thousands of photographs of documents in my computer. The problem is, over 15 years, the software that is not sharp anymore, but you wouldn't have found that out because you did this more recently. But my documents from 15 years ago, several hundred from each time I went to the Library of Congress, they've gotten blurrier and blurrier, and I don't know how to fix that. Yeah. But that's not what we're here for. I need you to tell me, since your mom is a judge, I have so many questions, one of which is, you know, I've been known to say over and over that Brendan Byrne, the governor of New Jersey, did us such a great favor by allowing all the documents from Hauptmann's trial to be made available to the public. But I question my own statement nowadays. I wonder, isn't that automatically, wouldn't Hauptmann's trial have automatically been in the public domain? Did Brendan Byrne actually do something marvelous by putting it in the Trenton Museum? I know you went there.
Absolutely, he did.
He did, okay.
He did, because what was public was what was entered into evidence.
Oh.
What that collection had were thousands of confidential documents, for example, including police reports, including original statements by witnesses that contradicted their sworn testimony, which the defense never got because they didn't have to share back then potentially exculpatory evidence. So all of these things were hidden, and Governor Burns made them available. So that was huge. But there were so many, 90,000 altogether, that it took someone like Michael Melsky to catalog them all. And he used every vacation for I don't know how many years to make that happen, because nobody could access them all. Mark Falzini hasn't looked at all of them as far as I could tell.
No.
It's hard. It's hard to do that. And they are not all digitalized. So you've got the key, when you look at Melsky's volumes 1 through 3, and I understand he's working on volume 4, but he didn't publish volume 3 until the fall of 2019.
Yeah.
So a lot of this wasn't that accessible, even though it was open to the public. But it was only open to the public in 1981.
Right, and that was prompted by Anna Hauptmann's attempt at an appeal, a lawsuit against Borden.
Right.
Was alive, Wilentz was alive. He was suing them personally. She
Right, she was, and ultimately also the FBI released formerly confidential documents under the Freedom of Information Act, I guess, in 2003. So it was another 22 years.
The summary, I'm sorry, the summary report was not released until 2003?
I don't know specifically the date of the summary report. I do know that there are many, many documents that are now available at the New Jersey State Police Museum that were FBI documents that say right on them that they were released in 2003.
Wow.
And they were some of the most confidential reports to J. Edgar Hoover that contradict the official FBI story that's out there now on this little book that they did on the kidnapping, which contradicts what their own records told them about Condon.
Well, that was the FBI summary report. That wasn't the New Jersey State Police report. Brendan Byrne, what he did was he released the New Jersey State files, but the FBI had their own files, and that was what was released, was the FBI summary report recently.
Right, that's what I'm talking about, 2003. So even though the state files were released in 1981, it was another 22 years. And in fact, the book that was edited by Finch, which says top secret on it, wasn't top secret because he issued that in 2001, and it didn't include the most confidential FBI files, which were released 2 years later.
Hey, Mom, can you face the camera? You're kind
Oh,
of
the
looking
camera's over here. I forgot, my camera's over this way.
No.
I'm looking at the screen, and my camera is a external camera, sorry.
And yeah, sorry.
I love, one of the things I was surprised and happy about in your book is your take on Jim Fisher.
Jim Fisher, it was amazing to me that he got rave reviews from the New York Times and others about the being the definitive work on the book, and he actually says in some places, I'm making this conversation up. I reconstructed it. And I'll give you one example. He included the pediatrician as if he were at the morgue during the autopsy when he didn't arrive until almost 1 o'clock in the morning, hours after it finished. But he has a three-way conversation reported. There are so many things in there that either cannot be verified or are not consistent with the record. And he does, actually, he knew a lot of that. I think he put a lot of things in footnotes and put in the text something that contradicted the footnotes and didn't really alert the reader that they were contradictory. So he puts in the text that the pediatrician ID'd, I think he put it in there that it's been a while, that he ID'd the corpse, and then he puts in a footnote saying a letter from the pediatrician to the governor saying, no, I didn't. I couldn't do it if you paid me $10 million. Right. So how can you reconcile those two things? You need to put them together and say it's disputed.
Right.
The other thing about Fisher is that he gave an interview to the New York Times or some other paper at the time that his book came out saying one of the primary reasons he wrote the book was to clear the New Jersey State Police. So he was writing it from that biased position to make sure that they were cleared. So to say that that's a definitive book when he came in it with his own bias, I don't see how, that reconciles.
Right.
So.
And some of it, I didn't start there. I assumed that what he said was correct when I started, and I used it as a resource. And the more I got into it, the more I realized it wasn't that reliable. Jamie actually put together a timeline for the day when the corpse was found, which differs significantly from the one in his chapter of the baby in the woods. And who was there and what happened when, it's not the same. And she's going from the record. She's going from the police reports.
Yeah.
But Melsky, I'm using Melsky for a lot of that because he did so much research. A lot of where we get our timeline from is from Melsky's research. So he's been a huge help for sifting through all the conflicting data. We would not have been able to Mom would not have been able to write this book without a lot of what he did.
And I want to say one thing also, that since it came out on September 1st, I've gotten comments from some folks saying that I got this fact wrong or that fact wrong. I've been double checking, because what I really want is to be as accurate as possible. And if there's an inaccuracy that crept in, I want to fix it. So I'm about to issue a corrected copy with a few fixes in it, which I established, but there are a few where I still adhere to the view I had before, and I don't think that the person trying to correct me is right. And I'll give you one example about the photo. The photo that's in the book that was identified by the widow of the primary investigator for Governor Hoffman as the last photo of little Charlie before he disappeared, full-length photo. Because there are two other photos that were, the two other photos were put in the newspaper, and actually the caption to the one with before the haircut says, "This is what it looked like when he disappeared." And yes.
Why don't you, what page is that on? Because that's not that, it's on a different page.
91, I think.
There's another picture. This is 91.
So
Right.
it's going to be the different one is actually the article. So on a different page.
Right, but these pictures came from that article. But in any event, he did have his hair cut on probably the last Thursday of February. And his grandmother kept the clippings and put them in an envelope and wrote on the outside of the envelope. And actually that wound up eventually in the Yale and Lindbergh collection. So I've seen those locks of hair. And it was acknowledged by by Schwarzkopf that he did have his hair cut. It was also acknowledged by everyone that he was 33 inches tall at his last pediatric appointment, and the corpse was measured at 33.5 inches, which could just be a discrepancy based on a relaxation of the body in death. But he was much bigger than what was in the poster, which said he was 29 inches tall when he disappeared. But I've had a forensic artist look at the pictures that were in the newspaper, and she said that is what she would, her opinion it would be, that a child who looked like little Charlie at age 1 would look like at 20 months. So we have a very strong endorsement of those two pictures as genuine, but they're only headshots. The other picture was ID'd by the archivist at UCLA as being a picture of Charlie. On the back of it, it says Lindbergh, and it was probably in the handwriting of Hoag. But all I say in the book is that they have ID'd it that way.
Right.
If they're correct, it was probably taken by Mrs. Morrow, his grandmother, or his Aunt Elizabeth in January or potentially early February of 1932. And it looks like it was in the schoolyard, potentially, where he was going then to the preschool. We can't identify it further right now, but he was about that size. And Jamie did the research on the tricycle, and it looks to be a tricycle with a 16-inch front wheel, which
hard to tell.
Which
no, the way that to do the research on the tricycle, I looked for tricycles. I did research to see what tricycles were around back then,
right,
and to see what what models look like that one. So, and I found there was a catalog, and I include that link, the website for the catalog for the Colson Ferry, which was a popular high-end model, which is something that I would think that someone of the Lindbergh stature would have bought for their son, because it's a high-end model. It also,
cool.
But yeah, but the catalog is the one there's no way for us to know how to measure how big that wheel is, but the catalog said that the most popular model they had a 16-inch front wheel. And so that's where, so we say, if this is a Colson Ferry model, the model number 1, then it had a 16-inch front wheel because that's what the catalog said. And the boy on the tricycle, if you consider the fact that he's not actually standing on the ground, he's raised up. If you were to draw a line from the top of his head to the bottom of his foot, it'd be about twice the height of that wheel. And we know that at the time,
I see. You doubled the wheel visually.
Double the wheel. That's about the height of the kid. So all we're saying is it's
32.
It's supporting evidence. It's supporting evidence that not only did the kid look like Charlie, but he was also approximately the same height as Charlie would have been at the time he disappeared. So
we have some more information.
So that's why we put that information in there, not to say that we know definitively that's what that is, but it's more supporting evidence. We also say that that Charlie also had a tricycle in his room, in his nursery. But there's in the crime scene photos, there's a picture of a tricycle next to his fireplace. So we know he had one. We know he was familiar with tricycles. And then trying to think, there's writing on the back. Well, that we think there's writing on the back because we took pictures. My mom took pictures of both the front and the back of this picture at the archive.
Right.
And on the back of the picture, not only does it say Lindbergh on it, but there seems to be faded writing on it that we haven't been able to verify yet. But we're going to try to see if UCLA can verify it with an expert that we think says January 1932. So we can't say that for sure, but there seems to be some indication there that it might say that.
There's more information too, and the more information is the weekend before he disappeared, he was described by Ada Breckenridge as looking over 2.5 years old. And that is in a typed statement that is at Yale about the final weekend that she and her husband spent with the Lindberghs. And we also know from the pediatrician that he had an oversized head and chest. So you have a 33-inch kid who looks closer to 3 than to 2, and he's only 20 months. And I think also that Hoag was a really good investigator. He has over 200 pages that he's written up about all his findings. And I cannot imagine him being handed a photo that looked so much older and a little different than the poster photos without verifying it with someone who knew, because Mrs. Morrow knew, the pediatrician who was cooperating with Governor Hoffman knew, the woman who ran the school still knew, and probably 20 some odd members of the household staff of Mrs. Morrow knew what he looked like when he disappeared. So it doesn't make much sense to me that Hoag would have gotten that from someone who he did not verify it with. But I also would expect that he got it from a reliable source. Newspapers were not allowed to take pictures of the little Charlie since October of 31. So it's rare to find any photos. We do know that photos were taken when he had his haircut, because it's listed in pencil on a list of photos of little Charlie that's at Yale, that is on Charles Lindbergh stationery. Okay, and it says that were 2 photos taken in February at Englewood. And so we know that there were photos taken then. We don't know if those are the exact same photos that were in the newspaper, but they might well be. And it wouldn't surprise me that Mrs. Morrow or his doting Aunt Elizabeth would take pictures when Lindbergh wasn't around and keep them to themselves. So if they thought, like Ellis Parker did, that there was a possibility that the corpse was not little Charlie, that he was still alive somewhere, they would be very anxious to cooperate with what he looked like the last time any full-length picture was taken. So it would seem odd to me that Hoag kept that all those years, and his wife believed it was little Charlie, and somehow somebody hoodwinked him. The other question that was raised by someone when my book came out was, well, this is really Charles Sr., not Jr. But in my book, in Act 5, I have a photo of Charles Sr. at about the same age, and I don't think you can mistake one for the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So how many, since you've been to Yale or your researchers have been to Yale, and you're right, members of the family would have secretly taken photos because he was the master, he was the commander of photos of the child. How many pictures do you think, if you added up all the photos we've known about, are there a dozen? Are there 20? It's the least photographed child in the history of famous people.
Actually, at Smith College, they have a collection of photos that were taken probably through the age of 1 or a little bit longer. I think that Betty Gow took a few in the summer of 1931. Lindbergh was upset about that. He didn't want her to have photos taken. So there were birthday photos in June. There were probably photos in July and August. And when he got back from his long trip to Asia in October, he banned any further photos. His mother-in-law obviously didn't listen to him because there were photos taken at the haircut. I did the same thing for my grandson, Jamie's son. When they have their first haircut, it's a big deal for the grandmother. And she was wealthy enough and powerful enough that she wasn't going to do everything that her son-in-law told her.
I think just from my personal research, the photos that we've seen, that I think that exist at Smith, and I think they're in the Smith collection. The latest photos that I have seen are from that fall of 31. I haven't seen any pictures that are dated beyond that. Those are the last ones I've seen in the personal collections, the actual photos. Now the references to them, like my mom said at Yale, there's reference to the 2 photos in February of 32. But in terms of the actual photographs, the last photos I've seen that are actually dated and confirmed and are at Smith, and I think they're like August or September of 31, and they're with I think Lindbergh's mom because she was visiting. Yeah. Well,
I want to say that regardless of this bicycle controversy, regardless of Hoag's interpretation of that photograph, you are using it to make a point about hydroencephalus.
Definitely.
So regardless, I don't find it that important. I find what's important about your theory is that something was wrong with Charlie, and we've all been through this for 20-something years. What could have been wrong with him? And that's most important to me, is your theory about what could have been wrong with the child. And you make
there's one other point, I'm sorry, about what he looked like that I wanted to make. It's in Anne's diary, his mom's diary. She writes that she's really losing the mental picture of what he really looked like because of those old pictures of him at the age of 1 that were ubiquitous. So it was upsetting her that was what was out there as opposed to what he really looked like.
Right. So what is it called? I'm sorry.
Hydrocephalus.
Which is water on the brain, water.
Well, that's the Greek that's a translation from the Greek. It's actually spinal fluid on the brain. It's a fluid that surrounds the brain.
Right. And that's a judgment made by your interpretation with Philip Venningen, the great pediatrician of our country at the time. He was a very, how can you say, he was a very well-respected pediatrician on all the committees everywhere, and he couldn't identify. There are so many contradictions about him. Do you want to explain?
Philip Venningen?
Yeah.
The doctor. Yeah.
Why was Elizabeth Morrow writing to him in the first place?
When are you referring to? He wrote to her.
Oh,
not Elizabeth. He actually wrote to Mrs. Morrow. He didn't write to Elizabeth.
That is Elizabeth.
That's her name.
There's 2 Elizabeths.
Oh, I was thinking of the daughter.
Right.
Yeah, Mrs. Morrow. He wrote to her. There was some concern about his health. Mrs. Morrow was quoted in the newspapers on March 3rd as saying that she thought that the state of his health might have been a factor in what happened to him.
He initiated all this. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But Dr. Van Ingen never diagnosed him with hydrocephalus. He diagnosed him with rickets. We have no record that he had hydrocephalus. What we do know that he was megalocephalic, meaning he had an oversized head.
Right.
Which can also be from other causes besides excess spinal fluid.
Right.
And you got that information. So there was another medical opinion that talked about that, right? Is it the 2016 film or 2013?
2016, there was a pediatric surgeon who believed that he must have been hydrocephalic, but she had no more information than is out there for the rest of us.
Right.
We know that the autopsy, partial autopsy, the look-see, identified an oversized head as well as the pediatric record that was verified by Dr. Van Ingen. We don't have the actual pediatric record, but we do have a sworn statement by Dr. Van Ingen. We have a letter from him to Mrs. Morrow, and we have what he said when he went to the morgue. So we have 3 different sources for his opinions.
Right.
But it's never been verified. However, it looks to me very possible that his father thought he was hydrocephalic. And one of the reasons for that is that from what little I've learned from consulting experts, because I don't have any expertise in this, is that by the age of 2, it can affect the child's mental capacity. And they're expected at that time to live shorter lives because they hadn't developed a reliable shunt as of then, although shunt experiments had been done prior to that for many, many years. Not until 1949 did they have a reliable shunt to get rid of the excess spinal fluid. So they didn't necessarily have a long life expectancy, and that might have been a factor that his father was concerned about. But one of the things that struck me as odd is that Lindbergh paid very little attention to his only child at the time. He kept taking his wife away for playing lessons got her home after the little boy went to bed. He insisted that the child have a bedtime before he arrived home for dinner, and took her off on long trips, the China trip for a couple months, without being with their son, who she sorely missed. So you see all that, and then at Christmas, he spent a couple of days straight asking his son question after question about the Noah's Ark that he got for Christmas from Mrs. Morrow, and each of the animals, and if he could identify it. And I just wonder if he was doing that to test his mental acuity. But every reference that I saw from Betty Gow, keeping track when Anne wasn't around, and from Anne's letters and own diary entries, and his grandmother's records about the little boy, is that he seemed very quick, have a good memory. He memorized almost all the animals very quickly, and nursery rhymes, and was counting. So I don't see any evidence that he had mental problems.
Oh, so you're not considering any type of mental retardation or, yeah.
I don't see that.
Physical thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have to tell each of you that this has never happened to me before. I'm getting a notice that we're going to end in 2 minutes.
Oh.
Unless I upgrade to Pro, and I don't know how to do that while you're on.
Got it.
So maybe we'll meet again.
Well, could we meet in a couple of minutes as we shut down, and I'll resume the, because I've.
Absolutely, we can do that.
So you'll come back? Okay,
We'll come right back.
You have to re-invite us.
I know. I'm going to do a part 2, everybody, so stay tuned.